traditional spiritual teachers, for example, or traditional religions often see psychology as simply concerned with the ego, selfishness, and they fail to see the value of that in terms of personal growth or healthy personal development.
Yeah.
So,
or at least not dealing with real values.
Yes. And so I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen on both sides, because in fact I see them as complementary aspects of human development, both of which are necessary for wholeness and for real healing in our lives. So I feel that there needs to be a lot of bridging work between the two, so that people don't feel that they have to choose either a psychological discipline or a spiritual discipline, but that in fact both are important.
Now, in your work, what I've noticed is that you've drawn from many traditions. You've looked at the Christian spiritual path, you've looked at Zen, Buddhism, you've looked at yoga, and a number of others in your writings. And you seem to be saying that they all point in the same direction, don't you?
Well, I like the analogy of truth as a mountain, with all the different religious paths as different approaches to climbing the mountain, so that you see many different paths up the mountain, and when you're down in the lower slopes you may argue about the shape of the mountain, but the more you work on it and the further up you go, the more you see that there's a convergence, that there are certain values, for example, that tend to be common to all different traditions, and that even though different paths provide different experiences along the way, I feel very strongly that there is a universal experience of self-transcendence that's possible, and that in fact this can be very healing for people. It can have a very positive effect in terms of their psychological development if such an experience is appropriately integrated.
A universal quality of self-transcendence.
Yes.
That's sort of putting it in a nutshell, isn't it? How does that translate, say, to a therapy practice when you're working with someone?
Well, in my practice, I find that sometimes people seek me out because they know I have a transpersonal orientation, and particularly if they've had some kind of experience that has opened up some spiritual issues for them, or if perhaps if they've been practicing meditation and they want to talk things over with someone who has an understanding of the practice and what those experiences might be like. Or they may have had some kind of spontaneous opening and had an experience of self-transcendence that they want to make sense out of, that they want to integrate in some way.
Is it something that people need to seek? I mean, if a person came to you and they're having marital problems or some other type of conventional psychological problem and they don't have a thought about spiritual experience, is there any application there?
Well, my experience is that it depends how deeply people want to do inner work, because often people will come into therapy seeking relief for some kind of interpersonal stress. You know, some relationship issue is very common, for example, either marital problem or a breakup of a relationship. And but sooner or later, I think everyone has to confront themselves. And that very often in relationships, we tend to think, well, if only the other person were different, then everything would be all right. But ultimately, I think we have to take a look at what we're contributing and how we can make a difference in terms of the quality of relationships that we have in our lives.